I saved a child's life, but became a villain in their parents' eyes. I was walking home from work when I heard shouting directly above me, and then saw a baby falling from a fifth-story window. It hurled through the air, and my brain didn't even think. My body just reacted as I dropped my suitcase and held my arms out to catch the baby as close to my chest as possible. It landed directly in my arms as I curled around it, doing everything I could to minimize any impact damage. I dropped to my knees, too scared to check, but praying it was alive. After what felt like hours, but were only seconds, I heard the baby's weak cry. It was alive. The parents, a couple in their late 40s, came running out of the building seconds later. They were sobbing, terrified, grabbing the baby from my arms. "Thank you. Thank you. You saved our baby," the mother kept repeating. The father hugged me, tears streaming down his face. An ambulance arrived and took the baby to the hospital. The parents called me a hero. I went home feeling anxious, but proud. 1 week later, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find a man in a suit handing me an envelope. I tore it open, thinking maybe it was a thank you letter or money from the parents. Instead, it was lawsuit papers. Apparently, the impact from me catching the child had broken both his arms and legs. He was alive, but in critical condition, and the parents were now suing me for $2 million, criminal child endangerment, and reckless rescue attempt. If I lost, I could face 5 to 10 years in prison. I called the parents 15 times, but they didn't answer. I drove to their apartment. The father opened the door, face red with anger. "You broke our baby," he yelled, physically pushing me. "Get away before we call the police." He slammed the door in my face. The next morning, I went to my assigned public defender, Mr. Ramsey. He was juggling 40 cases and barely had time for mine. "This doesn't look good," he said. "Technically, you caused the injuries. The law doesn't care about intentions." I looked at him dumbfounded. "Just take the plea deal." 2 years is better than 10, he urged. The preliminary hearing 3 weeks later was a nightmare. The prosecutor showed photos of the baby's x-rays. The parents cried while testifying about their traumatized child. Several witnesses claimed they saw me drop the baby. I walked out in disbelief. This was actually happening. The day before the final trial, Mr. Ramsey called with a new plea deal. 3 years in prison. "Take it. If we go to trial and lose, it's 10, he said. I saved that baby's life. I wasn't pleading guilty. That night, I broke down in my apartment. The next day, the courtroom was packed. The parents sat in the front row, looking like grieving victims. The prosecutor's opening statement destroyed me, while Mr. Ramsey's was weak and unprepared. I could see in the judge's eyes that she had already made up her mind. The prosecution spent 2 days presenting their case, expert witnesses, medical testimony, the parents crying on the stand. It was over. I was going to prison for catching a falling baby. At the end of the trial, the prosecutor asked, "Does the defense have any witnesses?" "No, Your Honor," Mr. Ramsey replied. The judge looked at him. "Does the defense have anything else?" "No," he said. The judge was about to bang her gavel when the courtroom doors burst open. A young woman limped in on crutches, her leg in a cast. The parents' faces went ghost white. "Who are you?" the judge asked. "Betty Rodriguez, their former foster daughter," she said, pointing at the parents. "I have evidence of what really happened that day." Betty limped forward and handed her phone to the judge. Her expression went from annoyed to shocked to furious in seconds. "Bailiff, lock those doors." "Nobody leaves," she ordered. She connected her phone to the courtroom screen. "I'm going to play this for everyone." The video showed the father at the window, looking down at the street, seconds before the baby fell. The mother joined him, holding the baby. They discussed suing as if the fall was planned. The baby climbed out of the crib and fell, and I just happened to catch him. Perfect. Then the mother dropped the baby intentionally. The courtroom erupted. The parents screamed, claiming Betty had edited the video. She pulled out a thick folder. "I have more," she said. What was in the folder revealed even more about the parents' intentions. The judge's expression changed from curiosity to shock to disgust as she flipped through the pages. The parents screamed, insisting Betty was lying, that she had a grudge, that she was mentally unstable. The judge slammed her gavel down 3 times, the sound echoing through the silent courtroom. She told the parents to be quiet, or she'd charge them with contempt of court. They stopped yelling, but the mother was still crying and shaking her head. The judge looked at both lawyers and told them to approach the bench immediately. Mr. Ramsey stood up and walked forward with the prosecutor. I watched Mr. Ramsey's face as the judge showed him something from the folder. His eyes went wide and his mouth opened slightly. He looked back at me with an expression I'd never seen before, like he finally believed I was telling the truth. The prosecutor looked pale and kept shaking his head while reading whatever the judge was showing them. They whispered back and forth for a few minutes as everyone in the courtroom waited. The judge finally told them to return to their seats. She announced a 30-minute recess and said the parents had to stay in the courtroom under bailiff supervision. 2 bailiffs moved to stand near the parents' seats. Betty was escorted to a private room by another bailiff for her safety. I just sat there shaking. My hands were trembling and I couldn't stop them. Someone had actually come forward to help me. After weeks of thinking I was completely alone, that nobody believed me, that I was going to prison for saving a life, someone had proof. I couldn't process it. During the recess, Mr. Ramsey came over and sat next to me. For the first time since this started, he looked at me like I was a real person, not just another case number. He apologized. He said he should have believed me sooner, should have investigated more, should have fought harder. He admitted he was too overwhelmed with his caseload to give my case the attention it needed. His honesty didn't erase the damage or the weeks of terror, but it was something. At least he was being real with me now. The 30 minutes felt like hours. I kept looking at the parents, sitting there with the bailiffs nearby. They weren't crying anymore. They just looked angry and scared. When the recess ended, the courtroom filled back up. The judge came in and everyone stood. She told everyone to sit, and then asked Betty to approach the witness stand. Betty limped forward on her crutches and sat down. The bailiff swore her in, and she put her hand on the Bible. The judge asked her to state her full name for the record. Betty said, Betty Rodriguez. She explained she had lived with the parents as a foster child for 2 years when she was 16. The parents' lawyer immediately objected, saying her testimony was irrelevant and that whatever happened years ago had nothing to do with my actions. The judge looked annoyed and overruled the objection. She told Betty to continue. Betty explained she was in a coffee shop across the street that day. She saw the whole incident from the window and recorded it on her phone because she recognized the parents walking past earlier. From her experience living with them, she knew they were always planning something. When she saw them at the window holding the baby, she started recording. The parents' lawyer tried to object again, but the judge shut him down quickly. Betty continued. She said she stayed in contact with other kids who had been fostered by these parents. 3 other children went through similar experiences. The parents would stage accidents and then try to profit from insurance claims and lawsuits. The pattern was always the same: stage an accident, find someone to blame, sue for money. One child got pushed down the stairs, and they blamed a teacher who tried to help. Another was involved in a fake car accident. Every time, the parents found a way to make money off it. The prosecutor looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. His face went white, and he put his hand on the desk to steady himself. His entire case was collapsing in front of everyone. He stood and asked the judge for a sidebar. She agreed, and they walked to the side of the courtroom. They whispered intensely, the prosecutor gesturing and shaking his head. Meanwhile, the parents' lawyer took notes quickly and made phone calls from the defense table, his hands shaking as he dialed. The judge returned and told everyone to pay attention. She ordered the video to be played again, this time with the audio enhanced. The courtroom screen lit up. The parents' voices came through clearly. You could hear every word of their plan. The father talking about timing, about me walking under the window, the mother asking if they could really sue. Both calculated how much money they could make. Then the mother said now and dropped the baby. Their voices revealed they wanted the baby hurt enough to sue but not dead, planning to thank me first and sue later. Several jurors gasped. One woman in the front row started crying. Another juror looked furious, staring at the parents with disgust. The parents sat with their heads down, silent. Betty pulled out more papers from her folder. She explained they were hospital records. The baby had visited the emergency room 4 times in the past year. Each visit was for suspicious injuries, and each time the parents blamed someone else, a babysitter they claimed had dropped him. The prosecutor, shaking, stood and requested all charges against me be dismissed immediately. He also asked for the parents to be taken into custody on suspicion of child endangerment, fraud, and conspiracy. Chaos erupted in the courtroom as 2 bailiffs moved toward the parents. The father tried to flee but was tackled and restrained. The mother screamed that they needed the money for their baby, repeating herself while the bailiffs held the father. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly to restore order. Once quiet, she formally dismissed all charges against me with prejudice and ordered my immediate release. Then she turned to the parents, issuing a bench warrant for their arrest on multiple charges, including child abuse, fraud, extortion, perjury, and conspiracy. The bailiffs handcuffed them as the mother sobbed and begged for mercy, while the father stood defeated and silent. I sat numb, unable to process what was happening. I was actually free. The judge asked Betty if she had anything more to add. She explained the folder contained financial records showing the parents were $300,000 in debt and had run insurance scams for at least 5 years, always targeting good people to profit from staged accidents. She laid out bank statements, credit card bills, and loan documents showing their long pattern of fraud. The judge thanked Betty, promised her protection, and noted her testimony would be crucial in the criminal case against the parents. Betty nodded, wiped her eyes, and stepped down as the judge called for another recess to let everyone process the events and coordinate the parents' arrest. After the judge left, Ramsey came over. He looked unsure at first, then quietly apologized for how the public defender system had failed me. He admitted he should have investigated more and believed me sooner. He offered to help me file a lawsuit against the parents for malicious prosecution, but warned they likely had no assets. I told him I just wanted this nightmare over, and he nodded, giving me his card anyway. In the hallway, a man in a suit introduced himself as Garrison, a defense attorney who wanted to represent me pro bono for any civil claims against the city, prosecutor's office, or the parents. I took his card but was too overwhelmed to think about lawsuits. Betty found me a few minutes later. She explained she had been tracking the parents for 2 years after aging out of foster care, collecting evidence until they made a mistake she couldn't ignore. She had recorded them dropping the baby and filing the lawsuit against me. I thanked her, telling her she saved my life. She said she couldn't let them destroy another person like they had tried to destroy hers. We hugged, and I felt immense gratitude. The prosecutor approached next, apologized for mishandling the case, and said his office would review the situation. He added the FBI would investigate the parents' fraud across states and asked if I'd be available for interviews. I agreed and put the card in my pocket. Betty checked if I was okay. We exchanged numbers, and she left on her crutches. I drove home in silence, hands shaking. Once inside, I collapsed on the couch. My phone rang repeatedly with unknown numbers, reporters, lawyers, others, but I turned it off and sat in the dark, feeling heavy, exhausted, and strangely empty, yet relieved. I stayed on the couch for hours. The next morning, my phone was off when someone knocked. A man in a dark suit introduced himself as Desmond Harrell from the FBI. He explained the parents' scheme was larger than expected. They had been moving between states, taking in foster children and staging accidents for insurance and lawsuits for over a decade. He scheduled a formal interview at the FBI office 2 days later and left his card. At the FBI office, I gave a full statement about catching the baby, the trial, and Betty's evidence. Desmond showed me files on 6 other victims who had been sued or prosecuted for trying to help in staged accidents. Most suffered serious consequences, and I realized I was lucky Betty had come forward with proof. He told me the baby was in protective custody, recovering well, and that my action likely saved the child's life. A few days later, Kirsten Weaver from Child Protective Services interviewed me for a case to permanently terminate the parents' rights. I described their calculated behavior, fake crying, and courtroom performance. I signed a formal statement documenting everything, which would help ensure the baby never returned to them. The local news ran the story, and national outlets called for interviews. Garrison advised staying quiet until the criminal case was resolved. 2 weeks later, the parents were formally charged with 12 counts, including child endangerment and fraud, spanning 4 states. They couldn't pay bail and remained in jail, looking defeated during their arraignment. Meanwhile, I started having nightmares about dropping the baby or going to prison. My sleep suffered and work performance declined. I began therapy, where I learned I was experiencing trauma from being punished for doing the right thing. Therapy helped, though I still flinch whenever I hear a baby cry or see someone in danger. Garrison called about filing a civil lawsuit against the parents to seek compensation for legal fees, lost wages, and emotional distress. He warned we probably wouldn't collect anything since they were broke, but I just wanted it on record that they had destroyed my life. He filed the lawsuit the next day. A few days later, Betty invited me for coffee. She told me about her time living with the parents, how they staged a car accident and forced her to lie. When she refused, they made her life miserable until she was removed. She showed me messages from other former foster kids who had been used in similar schemes. The FBI planned charges that could lead to 30 to 40 years in prison for both parents. 2 days later, my neighbor Amara brought a homemade curry, offered to be a character witness, and shared her story about losing a brother to wrongful conviction. Her kindness reminded me that good people still existed. 3 weeks after my charges were dismissed, the parents' criminal trial began. The courtroom was packed. The defense tried to portray them as desperate and scared, but the jury looked skeptical. Betty took the stand, presenting video evidence and explaining the pattern of abuse. Despite attempts to discredit her, she remained calm and factual. The prosecution presented files on 8 previous schemes across 4 states, totaling over $2 million in fraudulent claims. Victims testified about staged accidents and lawsuits. By the end of the second day, the pattern was clear, and even the defense lawyer seemed defeated. On the third day, I took the stand and described everything from catching the baby to being sued and nearly imprisoned for doing the right thing. I explained how I couldn't sleep and flinched at babies crying. The defense tried to downplay my experience, suggesting I exaggerated, even asking if I should have let the baby fall. A juror visibly got angry, forcing a brief recess. The prosecution called the hospital doctor, who showed X-rays and explained the injuries were consistent with a 5-story fall. She confirmed my actions saved the baby's life, and any injuries were unavoidable. The defense argued I caught the baby wrong, but the doctor shut that down. On the 4th day, the father broke down on the stand, admitting they planned everything to get money. The mother remained stone-faced. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and returned guilty on all 12 counts for both parents. Sentencing 2 weeks later was firm. The father got 12 years, the mother 10, plus full restitution to victims, though the $2 million would likely never be recovered. Both showed no emotion as bailiffs led them away. I watched silently, feeling empty rather than relieved after 3 months of fear, shame, and anger. Garrison stayed with me, but I couldn't move. Justice had been served, but it didn't undo the nights I lost or the way people treated me. We left the courthouse, ignoring reporters, and I drove home, sitting in my apartment staring at the wall for hours. A week later, an unknown number called my phone. I almost didn't answer, but it was Kirsten Weaver from Child Protective Services. She updated me that the baby was now with a foster family specializing in infants with medical needs, healing well, and possibly up for adoption if parental rights were terminated. Knowing he was safe made me cry for the first time since the trial. A few days later, I met Betty for coffee. She shared more about her time in foster care and how the parents exploited her and other kids for payments. She was studying social work and wanted to help abused foster children. We talked about possibly creating a nonprofit to support victims of fraud schemes. 2 weeks later, Garrison called about the civil lawsuit he filed. They'd likely never pay the $200,000 damages, but having the judgment on record validated what happened. He reminded me he handled the case pro bono. Returning to work felt strange. I was anxious, avoided people, and couldn't walk under apartment windows without fear. My boss let me work from home 3 days a week, which helped. Coworkers who ignored me before suddenly acted friendly, but I kept interactions brief. 6 weeks after the trial, FBI agent Hurled updated me. The parent scheme targeted 17 victims across 6 states, totaling over $3 million in fraudulent claims. Some victims had even served prison time. My case was the breakthrough that stopped their operation, and Hurled thanked me for helping protect others. 6 months later, I was doing better, but still seeing a therapist twice a week to cope with anxiety and trust issues. I learned that feeling scarred after being punished for doing the right thing was normal, and that catching the baby was still the right choice.